The storm hit Red Hollow like a fist, and Mei Lin Zhao was dying in it, not from the cold, but from the hatred that had driven her into it. She'd survived an ocean crossing, months of backbreaking labor for pennies, and the daily cruelty of men who saw her face and decided she didn't belong. But tonight, bleeding from a gash above her eye and soaked to the bone, she wondered if survival was just another word for suffering. Then a voice cut through the wind, rough, uncertain, but undeniably human. "You gonna sit there and freeze, or you gonna let me help?" She looked up at the cowboy standing in the rain, his hand extended, and made a choice that would change both their lives forever. If you want to see how Mei Lin's story unfolds, from outcast to the woman who changed everything, stay until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down like nails. Mei Lin pressed herself against the side of the general store, trying to make herself small, invisible. Blood mixed with water on her face, dripping from the cut above her eyebrow where the rock had hit. Her clothes clung to her like a second skin, heavy and cold. She could still hear them, the men who'd chased her out of the boarding house, their voices loud with whiskey and righteousness. "Go back where you came from. We don't need your kind here," she'd tried to explain, tried to show them the coins she'd saved, enough for 1 week's rent. But the landlady had taken one look at her face and slammed the door. Then the men had come. They always came. Red Hollow, Wyoming Territory, 1882, population 463. 462 who wished she'd never arrived. Mei Lin had learned to count people that way. Those who wanted her gone, and her. Always her. Alone. The cut above her eye throbbed. She touched it carefully, fingers coming away red. The rock had been small, thrown more for sport than real harm, but it had found its mark. She'd run then, stumbling through the mud as laughter followed her into the storm. Now she sat against the rough wooden wall of Chen's general store, the only building in town with a Chinese name, though Mr. Chen had been dead for 3 years. His widow had sold it to a man named Pritchard, who'd kept the name because he thought it brought him luck with the railroad workers. Mei Lin knew better. Pritchard kept the name because changing signs cost money. The street was empty. Everyone with sense had gone inside. The storm had rolled in fast, the kind that turned the world gray and made you wonder if the sun had ever existed at all. Thunder cracked overhead, and Mei Lin flinched. She hated thunder. It sounded too much like cannon fire, like the sounds that had driven her family from their village, that had sent her across an ocean to a country that looked at her and saw only a problem to be solved. She needed shelter, needed it desperately. But where? The boarding house was out. The hotel charged $3 a night, more than she made in a week washing dishes at the saloon. The church, she'd tried the church once. Reverend Daniels had looked at her with pity and said something about God's plan before sending her away. She hadn't understood all his words, but she'd understood the gesture toward the door. So she sat in the rain and bled and tried to remember why she'd thought America would be different. "You picked a hell of a night to give up." The voice startled her. Mei Lin's head snapped up, and she immediately regretted the movement. Pain lanced through her skull. She squinted through the rain at the figure standing a few feet away. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that had seen better years and a hat that dripped water like a broken gutter. He wasn't looking at her with disgust or pity or that careful nothing look people wore when they wanted to pretend she didn't exist. He was just looking. "I said, I heard you," Mei Lin said. Her English was good enough for that. She'd been practicing for 2 years, ever since the missionary in San Francisco had told her that words were survival and silence was death. "I'm not giving up." "No?" The man tilted his head. "What do you call sitting in a storm, then?" "Waiting." "For what?" Mei Lin didn't have an answer to that. Or maybe she had too many answers, and none of them made sense when spoken aloud. She was waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for a miracle, waiting for the world to stop being what it was. The man studied her for a moment longer, then shook his head. "You're bleeding." "I know. You gonna do something about it?" "Like what?" He sighed, the sound almost lost in the rain. Then he did something Mei Lin didn't expect. He walked closer, slow and deliberate, like he was approaching a spooked horse. When he was close enough that she could see his face clearly, Weathered, young, despite the lines around his eyes, stubborn in a way that suggested he'd earned every one of those lines. He crouched down. "Name's Colt Mercer," he said. "I got a ranch about 3 miles out. It's not much, but it's got a roof and a stove. You want shelter? You got it." Maylin stared at him. This was a trick. Had to be. Men didn't offer help without wanting something in return, and what they usually wanted from women like her, women alone, desperate, foreign, was something she'd die before giving. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why help me?" Colt Mercer was quiet for a moment. Rain hammered the street between them, turning the dust into soup. Finally, he said, "Because you're sitting in a goddamn storm instead of asking for help, and that's either the stubbornest thing I've ever seen or the loneliest. Maybe both." He stood up, offered his hand. "Your choice. But decide quick, because I'm getting soaked and my horse is getting mean." Maylin looked at his hand, looked at his face, saw no lie there, but also no promise. Just an offer, strange and sudden, from a man she didn't know. She took his hand. Colt pulled her up with surprising gentleness, steadying her when she swayed. Up close she could smell him, horse and leather and wood smoke. He smelled like work, like someone who didn't have time for cruelty because cruelty was a luxury and luxuries cost too much. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can sit." "Good enough." His horse was tied outside the saloon, a big roan mare with a white blaze and an expression that suggested she was reconsidering her life choices. Colt helped Maylin up, ignoring her wince when her ribs protested, then swung up behind her. The saddle was slick with rain, and for a terrible moment Maylin thought she'd slide right off. But Colt's arm came around her waist, holding her steady. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the mare into motion. They rode out of Red Hollow at a gallop, leaving the town and its hatred behind. Maylin closed her eyes and felt the rain on her face, and told herself this wasn't trust. Trust was something you earned over years, not minutes. This was just survival. One more day, one more choice. But as they rode through the storm, Colt Mercer's arms solid around her waist, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt safe. The ranch appeared out of the gray like a ghost. It wasn't much. Maylin could see that even through the rain. A small house, weathered wood gone silver with age. A barn that leaned slightly to the left, its door hanging crooked. Fences that had seen better decades. And land, acres of it, rolling away into the storm, brown and tired and thirsty. Colt dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, but she locked her knees and stayed upright through sheer will. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness was an invitation, and she'd had enough invitations to last a lifetime. "Barn first," Colt said, leading the horse toward the crooked door. "Luna here earned her keep today." Maylin followed, grateful to be out of the rain. The barn smelled like hay and manure and something else. Neglect, maybe. The kind of smell that came from too much work and not enough hands. There were 2 other horses in the stalls, both eyeing Luna with interest, as Colt stripped off her saddle and bridle. "You know horses?" he asked without looking at her. "I know how to stay out of their way." "Smart." He grabbed a brush and started working on Luna's coat, his movements practiced and efficient. Most people think horses are gentle. They're not. They're just big and scared and trying not to get hurt, same as the rest of us. Maylin watched him work. His hands were steady, confident. The kind of hands that knew what they were doing, that had done the same task 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. She found herself envying that certainty. "Why do you live alone?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it. Colt paused mid-brush, then continued. "Who says I'm alone?" "This place." Maylin gestured at the barn, the empty stalls, the tools that hung unused on the walls. "One man, maybe 2, no more." Colt glanced at her, something like surprise flickering across his face. "You got a good eye." "I learn to see what people don't say." "Yeah?" He went back to brushing. "Yeah, I bet you do." A pause. "It's just me now. Had help once, but that was before." "Before what?" "Before everything went to hell." He said it matter of fact, no self-pity, just stating a truth. Maylin understood that. She'd lived through her own version of hell, and self-pity was another luxury she couldn't afford. When Luna was settled, Colt led Mei Lin to the house. It was small inside, one main room with a kitchen at one end and a sleeping area at the other. A fireplace took up most of one wall, cold and dark. There was a table, 2 chairs, a trunk, and not much else. The windows were small and smudged with dirt. The floor was wood, scarred and uneven. It was the most beautiful place Mei Lin had seen in months. "Sit," Colt said, pointing at one of the chairs. He lit a lamp, then started building a fire. "You're shaking." Mei Lin hadn't noticed, but he was right. Now that they were out of the rain, her body had decided to inform her exactly how cold and hurt she was. She sat, wrapping her arms around herself. The fire caught quickly. Colt fed it until it was crackling, then turned to her. "Let me see that cut." "It's fine." It's bleeding. That's not fine." He grabbed a bowl and filled it with water from a pitcher, then pulled a cloth from somewhere. When he approached her, Mei Lin tensed, but Colt just crouched down and held out the cloth. "You do it, or I do it. Your choice." Mei Lin took the cloth. It was clean, or as clean as anything got out here. She dabbed at the cut, hissing when the water stung. "Someone threw a rock at you," Colt said. Not a question. "Yes." "In town?" "Yes." "Who?" Mei Lin looked at him. His face was hard now, jaw tight. "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it matters." "Why?" "Because—" He stopped, seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Because I need to know if they're going to come looking for you here." "They won't." Mei Lin was certain of that. The men who'd chased her didn't care enough to follow. Their fun had been in the chase, not the catch. "They wanted me gone. I'm gone." Colt didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he stood up and walked to the kitchen area. "You hungry?" Mei Lin's stomach answered for her, a low growl that echoed in the quiet room. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday? The day before? "I'll take that as a yes." Colt pulled out a pot and started assembling ingredients: beans, bacon, and onion. "It's not fancy, but it's food." While he cooked, Mei Lin looked around the room more carefully. There were things here that told stories if you knew how to read them. A rifle above the door, well maintained. A photograph on the mantel, faded and water-stained, showing a younger Colt with a woman and a child. Books on a shelf, their spines cracked from reading. A pair of small boots by the door, child-sized, gathering dust. "They died," Colt said quietly. He wasn't looking at her, focused on stirring the pot. "My wife and daughter, 3 years ago. Fever took them both in the same week." Mei Lin's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." He ladled stew into 2 bowls, brought one to her. "Eat." The stew was simple but good, better than anything she'd had in weeks. Mei Lin ate slowly, savoring each bite. Across from her, Colt ate with the mechanical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel, nothing more. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. "Mei Lin? Mei Lin Zhao." "Mei Lin," he repeated, the syllables clumsy in his mouth. "I probably said that wrong." "Yes, but that's okay. How long you been in Red Hollow?" 2 months. "Where were you before?" "San Francisco. Before that, China. Guangdong province." Colt nodded slowly. "Long way from home." "I have no home." The words came out harsher than she'd intended. "Home is where they don't chase you into storms." He didn't argue with that, just kept eating. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling around the corners of the house. "You can stay," Colt said eventually. "Tonight, I mean. There's a cot in the barn, but the barn is fine." "I was going to say, but you can have the bed." "I'll take the barn." Mei Lin stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're hurt and frozen, and you've had a shit day." He stood up, collecting the bowls. "And because it's the decent thing to do." "Decent?" Mei Lin tested the word. "People here, they don't do decent. Not for me." "Yeah, well." Colt set the bowls by the wash basin. "I ain't people. I'm just me." Mei Lin woke to sunlight and silence. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned. The storm, the cowboy, the offer of shelter. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The cut above her eye had scabbed over, pulling tight when she moved her face. The house was empty. Through the small window, she could see Colt outside, working on something near the barn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean. The sky was painfully blue. She stood up, testing her legs. Sore, but functional. Her clothes had dried stiff on her body, and she felt filthy. But she was alive, and that counted for something. Outside, the morning air was crisp and cold. Colt looked up when she emerged, wiping his hands on his pants. "You're up," he said. "How's the head?" "Still attached." "Good sign." He gestured at a bucket near the well. "Water there if you want to wash up. Soap, too." Maylin walked to the well, grateful for the offer. The water was cold enough to make her gasp, but it felt good to scrub away the grime. When she was finished, she felt almost human again. "So," Colt said when she returned. He was mending a fence post, hammering it back into alignment. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About you. About this place." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I need help. The ranch is dying. I can't keep it running alone, and I can't afford to hire anyone. You need work and a place to stay. Seems like we could help each other." Maylin went very still. "You want me to work here?" "If you're willing. It's hard work, long days, and I can't pay much, just room, board, and a little cash when I have it. But it's better than sleeping in storms." "Why me? Why not someone from town?" Colt looked at her then, really looked at her. "Because everyone in town thinks I'm crazy. Because they'd rather see this place fail than help me save it. And because—" He stopped, shook his head. "Because when I found you last night, you were ready to die rather than beg. That's the kind of stubborn I need." Maylin thought about San Francisco, where she'd scrubbed floors in boarding houses run by men who paid in insults. Thought about Red Hollow, where she'd washed dishes for pennies while men spat near her feet. Thought about the rock that had split her skin and the voices that had chased her into darkness. "What would I do?" she asked. "Everything. Anything. Mending fences, feeding horses, fixing the irrigation, planting, whatever needs doing." He gestured at the land around them, all that brown, tired earth. "This place used to be something. It could be again, but not with just me. The town will hate you more for having me here. Let them hate me. They already do." "Why?" Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I didn't die when my family did. Because I kept going when they thought I should have quit. Because I won't sell to Garrett Pierce, and that makes me inconvenient." He met her eyes. "I've got nothing left to lose, Maylin. Do you?" She thought about that. Thought about the ocean she'd crossed, the families she'd left behind, the life she'd never get back. Thought about being alone in a country that looked at her and saw only what she wasn't, not white, not wanted, not worth saving. "No," she said finally. "I have nothing left to lose." "Then stay. Work with me. We'll probably fail. This place is half dead already, but at least we'll fail trying." Maylin looked at the ranch, the crooked barn, the tired land, the house with its small windows and scarred floors. She looked at Colt Mercer, this stranger who'd pulled her from a storm and offered her something no one else had, a chance. "I'll stay," she said. "For now." "For now is good enough." Colt held out his hand. "Welcome to the Mercer Ranch. Try not to expect too much." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, honest. And for the first time in 2 years, Maylin Zhao allowed herself to hope. The first week was hell. Not because of Colt. He was fair, if demanding, but because Maylin's body wasn't ready for ranch work. She'd been strong once back in China, where she'd worked her family's small farm. But 2 years of menial labor and poor food had left her weakened. Now her muscles screamed every time she lifted a fence post. Her back ached from hauling water. Her hands blistered and bled from work she wasn't used to. She didn't complain. Complaints were weakness, and weakness was death. Colt noticed anyway. "You're pushing too hard," he said on the 5th day, when he found her trying to carry a bucket of grain to the barn, despite the fact that her hands were wrapped in rags to cover the worst of the blisters. "I can do it." "I didn't say you couldn't. I said you're pushing too hard." He took the bucket from her. "You're no good to me if you break yourself in the first week." "I won't break." Everyone breaks. The question is whether you're smart enough to rest before it happens. Maylin wanted to argue, but her hands hurt too much. She followed him to the barn, frustrated and angry, at him, at herself, at the world that had made her so desperate she'd rather bleed than slow down. "Sit," like Colt said, pointing at a hay bale. When she hesitated, he added, "That's not a request." She sat. He disappeared into the house and came back with a tin of salve. "Give me your hands. I can—" "I know you can, but you're not gonna." He crouched in front of her, waiting. Slowly, Maylin unwrapped the rags. Her hands looked worse in the daylight, raw, red, some of the blisters burst in weeping. Colt made a noise, low in his throat, then opened the tin. "This is gonna sting," he warned. It did. Maylin bit her lip, hard enough to taste blood, but she didn't pull away. Colt's hands were surprisingly gentle as he worked the salve into her palms, his touch careful around the worst of the damage. "You worked a farm before," he said. Not a question. "How do you know?" "Because you know which end of a shovel to hold." "Most city folk don't." He wrapped her hands in clean cloth, tying the bandages with practiced efficiency. "But farm work is different than ranch work. Takes time to build up the right calluses." "I don't have time." "Why? You got somewhere else to be?" Maylin didn't answer. The truth was complicated. She didn't have somewhere to be, but she had something to prove. That she could work. That she could earn her place. That she wasn't just another burden. She'd been a burden in San Francisco, scraping by on charity and pity. She wouldn't be that here. "You're afraid I'll change my mind," Colt said, reading her silence. "That I'll decide you're not worth keeping. Aren't I? Not worth keeping?" He sat back on his heels, studying her. "Maylin, in 5 days you fixed 3 fence posts, cleared half the irrigation ditch, and reorganized my tool shed so I can actually find things. You work harder than any hired hand I've ever had. And you don't waste time complaining about it. Why the hell would I want you gone?" "Because everyone else does." The words hung between them. Colt's jaw tightened, and for a moment Maylin thought she'd made him angry. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm not everyone else." "I know. But the town, screw the town. They'll make trouble for you. Let them try." He stood up, dusting off his hands. "I've got enough trouble already. A little more won't kill me." "But it might kill me," Maylin thought. "It might kill both of us." She didn't say it aloud. On the 8th day, Garrett Pierce came to call. Maylin was working on the irrigation ditch when she heard the horses. She looked up to see 3 riders approaching, 2 men she didn't recognize and 1 she did. She'd seen him in town, holding court outside the bank, surrounded by men who laughed too loud at his jokes. Garrett Pierce, land baron, cattle king, the man who owned half of Red Hollow and wanted the other half. She stood up slowly, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. The house was 100 yards away. Colt was in the barn. The men were between her and both. Pierce dismounted first. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of good looks that came from money and leisure. His clothes were expensive, tailored pants, a vest with silver buttons, boots that had never seen real mud. He smiled when he saw her, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Well now," he said. Colt didn't mention he'd hired help, especially not exotic help. One of the other men laughed. Maylin said nothing, just stood there with the shovel in her blistered hands and waited. "Where's Colt?" Pierce asked. "In the barn." "Go get him." It wasn't a request. Maylin wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this well-dressed vulture to get off their land, but she wasn't stupid. These men had guns. She had a shovel. The math was simple. She walked toward the barn, feeling their eyes on her back. Behind her, one of them said something low, and the others laughed. She kept walking. Colt looked up when she entered, immediately reading something in her face. "What's wrong?" "Men here? 3 of them. One is Pierce." Colt's expression hardened. He set down the bridle he'd been mending and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Stay here." "No." "Maylin, this is my home too." The words surprised both of them. "I stay." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded once. "Stay behind me, and if things go bad, you run. Understand?" She didn't agree, just followed him out into the sunlight. Pierce was waiting by the well, his men flanking him. When he saw Colt, his smile widened. "Colt Mercer. Been a while." "Not long enough." Colt stopped about 10 feet away. rifle held loose but ready. "What do you want, Garrett?" "Just checking on my investment." "This isn't your land." "Not yet." Pierce's smile never wavered. "But we both know it will be. This place is dying, Colt. You can't keep it running alone. The smart thing would be to sell to me now while you can still get something for it." "I'm not selling." "You will. Eventually. Everyone does." Pierce's eyes slid past Colt to Mei Lin. "Though I see you've found a novel way to delay the inevitable. Tell me, does she work for wages or for other compensation?" Mei Lin felt Colt go rigid. The rifle shifted, just slightly. "Careful," Pierce said, his voice still friendly. "I've got witnesses here. You shoot me, and it's murder. The law might not care much about me, but they'll care about that." "Get off my land," Colt said. Each word was carved from stone. "Your land, for now." Pierce tipped his hat. "Think about my offer, Colt, because next time I come back, the price goes down. And the time after that?" He looked at Mei Lin again, his meaning clear. "Well, I might want different compensation." Then he was back on his horse, his men following. They rode out at a leisurely pace, like they had all the time in the world. Which, Mei Lin supposed, they did. Colt didn't move until they were out of sight. Then he lowered the rifle and let out a long breath. "That man," Mei Lin said quietly. "He wants you broken. He wants me gone. There's a difference." "Is there?" Colt looked at her. "Yeah. Broken means you give up. Gone just means you're not here anymore." He shouldered the rifle. "I'm not planning on either. He won't stop. I know. He'll make trouble for both of us. I know that too." Colt turned toward the barn. "But I've been making trouble for myself since I was born. What's a little more?" Mei Lin watched him walk away, this stubborn man who'd rather fight a losing battle than admit defeat. She should have been afraid. Should have packed what little she owned and left before Pierce's threat became action. Instead, she picked up her shovel and went back to the irrigation ditch. If they were going to lose, they'd lose working. The trouble came 3 days later. Mei Lin was in town, a necessary evil, since they needed supplies, and Colt was dealing with a lame horse. She tried to talk him out of sending her, but he'd been firm. "They already know you're here," he'd said. "Might as well show them you're not hiding." So she'd taken the wagon and driven into Red Hollow, her list of necessities folded in her pocket and her stomach tight with dread. The general store was the same as always, crowded, loud, smelling of flour and tobacco and unwashed bodies. Mei Lin kept her head down and moved quickly, gathering what she needed. The clerk, a thin man named Jessup, who'd never been outright cruel, tallied her purchases without comment. She was loading the wagon when she heard the voice. "Well, look what crawled back into town." Mei Lin turned. 3 men, all young, all drunk despite the early hour. She recognized one of them, Jake something, the one who'd thrown the rock that night in the storm. "I'm just buying supplies," she said quietly. "Just buying supplies," Jake mimicked, his voice high and mocking. "You hear that, boys? She's just buying supplies. On credit, I bet, with Colt Mercer's money. It's his ranch. It's his money." "Yeah, and what are you doing to earn it?" One of the other men stepped closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "You warming his bed, China girl? That what this is?" Mei Lin's hands tightened on the wagon rail. "I work for him. I earn my keep." "I bet you do." Jake laughed, and the sound was ugly. "Must be nice, spreading your—" "That's enough." The voice cut through the ugliness like a knife. Mei Lin turned to see a woman standing in the doorway of the general store. Older, maybe 50, with steel gray hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Mrs. Patterson," Jake said, suddenly uncertain. "Go home, Jake Thornton, and take your drunk friends with you." Mrs. Patterson's voice was flat, unimpressed. "Before I tell your mother what you've been saying in the street." Jake's face flushed. "We were just— I know what you were doing. Now get." They went. Not quickly, not without dark looks, but they went. Mei Lin stood by the wagon, her heart pounding, unsure whether to be grateful or wary. Mrs. Patterson walked over to her. Up close, Mei Lin could see the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders curved slightly inward, like she was used to carrying weight. "You're the one working for Colt Mercer," she said. "Yes." "He treating you right?" The question surprised Mei Lin. "Yes, he's fair." "Fair." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. That's more than most can say. She paused, seemed to be weighing something. My husband works for Garrett Pierce, has for 10 years. He tells me things. Maylin waited. Pierce is planning something. I don't know what, but it's bad. And it's aimed at Colt. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were sharp, serious. You seem like a smart girl, smart enough to know when you're standing in a burning building. Get out while you can. Why are you warning me? Because I've watched too many people get crushed by men like Garrett Pierce, and I'm tired of it. She turned to go, then stopped. And because Colt Mercer is one of the few good men left in this town, he deserves better than what's coming. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the store. Maylin finished loading the wagon with shaking hands. All the way back to the ranch, she thought about Mrs. Patterson's warning, thought about Pierce's smile, about the way he'd looked at her like she was property to be acquired, thought about the fact that she'd called the ranch home without meaning to. When she got back, Colt was waiting by the barn. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him. All of it, the men, the insults, Mrs. Patterson's warning. When she finished, Colt was quiet for a long time. "You should go," he said finally. "What?" "Back to San Francisco, or somewhere else. Anywhere but here." He wouldn't look at her. "I had no right to ask you to stay. No right to put you in danger because I'm too stubborn to admit when I'm beat." "You're not beat. I'm close enough." His voice was rough, tired. "Pierce is right about one thing. I can't keep this place running alone, and with you here, I'm just making you a target. That's not fair." Maylin thought about San Francisco, about washing floors and sleeping in rooms that stank of other people's despair, thought about the ocean crossing, about her mother's face when she'd said goodbye, about the promise she'd made to herself, that she'd find somewhere to belong, somewhere she wasn't just surviving, but living. "No," she said. Colt looked up. "No? I'm not leaving." Maylin stepped closer. "You gave me shelter when no one else would. You gave me work, treated me like a person instead of a problem. I won't repay that by running." Maylin. Besides, she allowed herself a small smile. "You said it yourself. We'll probably fail, but at least we'll fail trying." Something shifted in Colt's expression. Not quite hope, but close. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm staying anyway. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both." Colt laughed then, unexpected and genuine. "Yeah, maybe both." He held out his hand. "Partners?" Maylin shook it. "Partners." And if they were both a little afraid of what that meant, neither of them said so. The first month passed in a blur of work and worry. Maylin learned the rhythms of the ranch. Early mornings when the air was still cool, long afternoons under a sun that baked the earth hard, evenings when every muscle screamed and sleep came like a hammer. She learned which fence posts were rotting, which irrigation channels were clogged, where the best grazing land lay fallow because there weren't enough hands to clear it. She also learned that Colt Mercer was a man who kept his word. He worked alongside her every day, never asking her to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When she struggled with a task, he showed her how without making her feel small. When she succeeded, he nodded his approval and moved on to the next problem. He was fair, honest, and relentlessly stubborn about this dying piece of land. She was starting to understand why. It was late afternoon when she found him staring at the irrigation ditch she'd been clearing for days. The main channel was nearly done, but there was a section that didn't make sense. It angled away from the fields, heading toward a dry gulch that looked like it hadn't seen water in years. "This goes nowhere," she said, joining him. "It used to go somewhere." Colt crouched down, running his hand along the packed earth. There was a spring up in the rocks. Small, but steady. Enough to keep these fields green, even in dry years. What happened to it? Dried up or got blocked? I don't know which. He stood, squinting toward the rocky hills in the distance. "I tried to find it once, but—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Maylin heard what he didn't say. "But I was alone, and there was too much else to do, and I gave up." She looked at the ditch, then at the fields beyond it, acre after acre of good land going to waste because there wasn't enough water. An idea began forming, dangerous and probably stupid, but she couldn't let it go. I could find it, she said. Colt looked at her. The spring? Yes, I know water. How it moves, where it hides. She'd learned it on her family's farm, where water was life and drought was death. If it's still there, I can find it. Maylin, those hills are rough country. You'd need to go alone. I can't leave the horses that long. And even if you found the spring, clearing whatever's blocking it could take days. So? So it's dangerous and probably pointless. That spring might be dead for good. But if it's not? She turned to face him fully. If the water is still there, this land could live again. Really live. Isn't that worth trying? Colt was quiet, studying her with those careful eyes. Finally, he said, You just got here. Why do you care if this place lives or dies? It was a fair question. Maylin thought about how to answer it. Because I'm tired of watching things die. My village died. My family scattered. Every place I've been since, I watched people give up, watched them stop fighting. She gestured at the land around them. This place isn't dead yet, and you're not ready to quit, so neither am I. Something shifted in Colt's expression, something that might have been respect or gratitude or just recognition of a fellow stubborn fool. If you go looking, he said slowly, you take the rifle, you take extra water, and you come back before dark whether you find anything or not. Deal? Deal. They shook on it, and Maylin felt the weight of it, the trust he was placing in her, the risk they were both taking. But risk was just another word for hope, and she'd been without hope for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. The next morning, she set out before dawn. The hills were rougher than they looked from the ranch. What seemed like a gentle slope from a distance turned into a scramble over loose rock and thorny scrub. Maylin moved slowly, following the old ditch as far as it went, then relying on instinct and memory. Water always took the easiest path. She just had to think like water. By midday, she was sweating and scratched and starting to doubt herself. The hills seemed to go on forever, each rise revealing another beyond it. She stopped to drink from her canteen, looking back at the ranch far below. It looked impossibly small from here, fragile, like something that could vanish if you blinked. She kept going. It was late afternoon when she found it, not the spring itself, but the signs of it. Green moss on rocks that should have been dry, a depression in the ground that was damp to the touch. And then following the trace of moisture upward, she found where the water should have been. A rock slide. Not recent, but not ancient either. Boulders had tumbled down from above, completely blocking what had once been a natural spring. Water was there. She could hear it, a faint trickling behind the rock. But it couldn't get through. It was trapped, useless, dying slowly behind its stone prison. Maylin sat down and looked at the rock slide and wanted to laugh or cry, or both. She'd found the spring, and it was completely impossible. She couldn't move those boulders alone. Some of them were bigger than she was. She'd need help, tools, probably a team of horses. And even then, it might not work. The spring might be too damaged, the water might have found another path, might be gone forever. But it was here. The water was here. She marked the spot carefully, stacking smaller stones into a cairn she could find again. Then she started back, racing the sunset. By the time she reached the ranch, it was nearly dark and she was exhausted, but she was grinning. Colt was waiting by the barn, worry written all over his face. When he saw her, relief flooded his features. I found it, she said before he could speak. The spring, it's blocked, but it's there. You're sure? I heard it, saw the moss, felt the dampness. The water is there, Colt. We just have to free it. He stared at her like she'd handed him a miracle wrapped in dirty clothes and scratches. Then he did something unexpected. He grabbed her shoulders and pulled her into a brief, hard hug. You're crazy, he said into her hair. You already knew that. He laughed, releasing her. Yeah, I guess I did. Then his expression turned serious. Can we move the rocks? Not alone. We'll need rope, tools, maybe the horses if we can get them up there. And time. At least 2 days, maybe 3. We don't have 3 days to spare. I know, but what choice do we have? Colt looked toward the hills, toward the water that was waiting, trapped. No choice at all, he said finally. We start tomorrow. That night, over a dinner of beans and cornbread, they planned. Colt sketched the route to the spring on a scrap of paper while Maylin described the rock slide. They argued about tools, about approach, about whether the horses could make the climb. The argument felt good, purposeful, like they were building something instead of just holding on. Pierce will hear about this, Colt said eventually. Once we start spending time up in those hills, people will notice. Let them notice. He might try to stop us. How? It's your land. Technically, the water rights aren't clear. If he argues that the spring feeds onto his property downstream, Colt shook his head, he'll find a way to make it legal trouble. Then we work fast. Maylin leaned forward. We clear the spring before he can stop us. Once the water is flowing, it's harder to claim it's not yours. That's assuming we can clear it at all. We will. How do you know? Because I have to believe in something, Maylin thought. Because if I don't believe we can save this place, then what was the point of staying? But what she said was, because you need it, and I promise to help. Colt looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, accepting the answer even though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth. They left at first light, both horses loaded with rope, picks, shovels, and enough supplies for 2 days. The climb was brutal, worse with the horses, who balked at the steeper sections and had to be coaxed forward with patience and cursing. By the time they reached the spring, it was past noon, and they were both exhausted. Hell, Colt said, staring at the rock slide, you weren't exaggerating. I told you it was bad. Bad doesn't cover it. He walked closer, examining the boulders. This is going to take more than 2 days. Then we take more than 2 days. Maylin said, the horses can graze. We have food. We make it work. She grabbed a pick. Unless you want to go back and tell the land, it'll have to stay thirsty. Colt looked at her, then at the rocks, then back at her. You're the stubbornest person I've ever met. Good. You'll need that. They worked until dark, barely making a dent. The boulders were wedged tight, some of them requiring both of them pulling on ropes just to shift an inch. By the time they stopped, Maylin's hands were bleeding through the bandages and every muscle felt like it was on fire. They made camp in a small hollow near the spring, building a fire from dead scrub. Colt produced a flask of whiskey, took a drink, and passed it to her. For the pain, he said. Maylin drank. It burned going down, harsh and strong. She coughed, and Colt smiled slightly. Not a drinker? Not usually. She passed it back. In China, my father made rice wine. It was smoother than this. Everything's smoother than Wyoming whiskey. That's half the point. He took another drink, then capped the flask. Tell me about China, about your family. Maylin was quiet. She didn't talk about her family, hadn't in months. Talking about them made them real, made their absence sharper. But something about the dark and the fire and the exhaustion made the words come easier. My father was a farmer. My mother kept chickens and sold eggs in the village. I had 2 brothers, both younger. She stared into the flames. When the soldiers came, they burned everything. Said we were harboring rebels. We weren't. We were just farmers, but it didn't matter. What happened? My father sent me away. Said I had to survive, had to make it to America where there was work, where I could send money back. Her throat tightened. I haven't heard from them in 2 years. Don't know if they're alive or dead or scattered. Colt was quiet for a while. Then he said, my wife's name was Sarah. My daughter was Emma. She was 4 when she died. Maylin looked at him. In the firelight, his face was harsh, all shadows and hard lines. Fever came through in summer. Sarah got it first, then Emma. I tried everything, doctors, medicine, cold baths, prayer. Nothing worked. His voice was flat, reciting facts. Sarah died on a Tuesday. Emma lasted until Thursday. I buried them both on the ridge above the ranch where you can see the whole valley. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring them back. He picked up a stick, poked at the fire. After they died, everyone expected me to sell, to leave. Pierce offered good money, but I couldn't do it. This place, it's the last thing I have of them. Emma used to run through those fields. Sarah planted flowers by the house. If I leave, I lose that too. So you stay. So I stay. He looked at her. Even though it's killing me, even though I'm probably going to lose it anyway, because giving up feels like betraying them. Maylin understood that, understood the weight of the dead, how they could anchor you or drag you under depending on the day. Your wife, she said carefully. Would she want you to suffer like this? No. Sarah was practical. She'd tell me to sell, to start over somewhere easier. He smiled, but it was sad. But I'm not practical. I'm stubborn and stupid, and I don't know how to quit. That's not stupid. Feels like it most days. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down. Above them, stars filled the sky, more stars than Mei Lin had ever seen. Out here, away from town, away from people and judgment and hatred, it was almost possible to believe the world could be beautiful. Thank you, Colt said after a while. For what? For staying, for caring, for... He gestured vaguely at the rock slide, at the camp, at everything. For making me feel less alone. Something in Mei Lin's chest tightened. You make me feel less alone too, she admitted quietly. Colt looked at her, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Two people who'd lost everything, who'd been marked by grief and stubbornness, who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided to hold on anyway. Then Colt cleared his throat and stood up. We should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse than today. Is that possible? With our luck, absolutely. Mei Lin smiled despite herself. Good night, Colt. Good night, Mei Lin. She lay down by the fire, exhausted and aching, and fell asleep listening to water trapped behind stone, waiting to be freed. The second day was worse. They worked from dawn until dusk, moving boulders inch by painful inch. The horses helped when they could, pulling on ropes, but some rocks were too big, too stubborn. Mei Lin's hands bled constantly now, the blisters reopening every time she gripped the rope. Colt's shoulder, injured years ago in a fall, started giving him trouble, making him wince every time he lifted his arms above his head. They didn't stop. By late afternoon, they'd moved enough rocks that Mei Lin could see the opening where water should flow. It was small, barely the width of her hand, but it was there. She knelt down, peering into the darkness behind the remaining boulders. I can hear it, she said. Running water. It's close. Colt joined her, listening. You're right. Maybe if we can shift this one, he pointed at a boulder the size of a small wagon. That might be enough. That rock weighs more than both of us together. I know, but if we can get the rope around it, use the horses for leverage. He walked around the boulder, examining it. There's a crack here. If we wedge the pick in, we might be able to tip it. It took them an hour to position everything. Rope looped through the crack, horses positioned downhill, Colt with the pick wedged into the crack while Mei Lin prepared to signal the horses. It was precarious, dangerous. If the rope snapped or the pick slipped, someone was going to get hurt. Ready? Colt called. Ready. On 3. 1, 2. The pick bit deep. Mei Lin signaled the horses. They pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that sounded like the earth itself complaining, the boulder shifted. Keep going, Colt yelled. The boulder tilted, teetered, then rolled. It crashed down the hillside, taking smaller rocks with it, the noise deafening. When the dust cleared, there was an opening where the boulder had been, a gap the width of Mei Lin's shoulders, dark and promising. Water trickled out. Just a little at first, tentative, like it didn't quite believe freedom was real. Then more, and more. Within minutes, the trickle became a stream. Within an hour, the stream became a flow. Water poured out of the opening, cold and clear, following the old channel downhill toward the ranch. Mei Lin stood in it, letting it wash over her boots, and laughed. She couldn't help it. They'd done it. Against all odds, against exhaustion and pain and common sense, they'd freed the spring. Colt was grinning, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. I'll be damned, he said. I'll be damned. We did it. You did it. I just pulled on a rope. We did it together. Mei Lin held out her hand. Colt took it, and they stood there in the flowing water, two people who'd been broken by the world but hadn't quite given up. It felt like victory. Small, muddy, exhausting victory, but victory nonetheless. They got back to the ranch late the next day to find trouble waiting. Jake Thornton was sitting on Colt's porch, his horse tied to the rail. When he saw them approach, he stood up, a smirk on his face that made Mei Lin's stomach tighten. Where have you two been? Jake asked. None of your business, Colt said flatly. Mr. Pierce thinks it is his business, especially when you're off in the hills messing with water rights. Water rights? Colt dismounted slowly. That spring feeds my land. Always has. That's disputed territory. Mr. Pierce has a claim to that water, says it crosses his property downstream. Jake was enjoying this, his smugness thick as oil. He sent me to tell you to stay away from it. Any interference, and he'll take it to the territorial judge. He can take it to the devil for all I care. That water is mine. Not according to the law. Jake spat in the dirt. And not according to decent folk who don't like seeing good ranchers take advice from Chinese whores. Colt moved fast. One moment he was standing by his horse, the next he had Jake by the collar, slamming him against the porch post. Say that again, Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. I want to make sure I heard you right before I break your jaw. Jake's eyes went wide. I'm just delivering a message. Then deliver it and get out. And if you ever speak about Mei Lin that way again, message or not, I'll make sure you regret it. Colt released him. Jake stumbled back, his face red, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine fear. He got to his horse, mounted clumsily. Mr. Pierce won't forget this, he said, trying to salvage some dignity. Good. Tell him I'm counting on it. Jake rode off fast, kicking up dust. Mei Lin stood by the wagon, watching him go, her heart pounding. She'd seen violence before, had grown up with it, lived through it, but seeing Colt defend her like that stirred something complicated in her chest. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Probably not. Colt was breathing hard, his hands still clenched into fists. But I'm not going to stand there and let him talk about you like you're nothing. Words don't hurt me. Maybe not, but they sure as hell hurt me. He looked at her. You're not nothing, Mei Lin. He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. You're the reason this place still has a chance, and I won't let anyone treat you like you're less than that. Mei Lin felt something crack open inside her, some wall she'd built to keep the world out. For 2 years she'd been invisible, disposable, tolerated at best. And now here was this stubborn rancher, ready to fight for her like she mattered. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me yet. I just made everything worse. Colt ran a hand through his hair. Pierce was looking for an excuse to escalate. I just handed him one. What will he do? I don't know, but it won't be good. They found out 3 days later when the water stopped flowing. Mei Lin noticed it first. She was checking the irrigation channels, making sure the water from the spring was reaching the fields, when she realized the flow had dropped to a trickle. By midday, it was gone completely. Colt rode up to the spring to investigate. He came back grim-faced. Someone blocked it again, he said. Filled the channel with rocks, diverted the water into a gully that runs onto Pierce's land. Who? Pierce's men. Had to be. Colt's jaw was tight. This is his answer. Can't stop us legally yet, so he's stopping us practically. We can clear it again. And he'll block it again. And we'll clear it. And he'll block it. Colt shook his head. This is his game now. Make us waste time and energy until we break. So what do we do? Colt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hard. We make it so he can't block it. We build something permanent, a channel he can't easily fill, reinforced with timber and stone. Make it so obvious and established that even a territorial judge would have to acknowledge our claim. That will take weeks, cost money we don't have. I know. He looked at her. But what's the alternative? Give up? Let him win? Mei Lin thought about the spring, about the water they'd freed, about the fields that could live again if they just kept fighting. No, she said, we don't give up. Then we work. Harder than before, faster. We build that channel before Pierce can shut us down for good. It was a desperate plan, maybe a stupid one, but it was what they had. They started the next day, riding up before dawn with tools and timber. The blockage was worse than Colt had described. Rocks piled high, deliberately placed to redirect every drop of water. It took them hours just to clear it, and by the time they finished, they were both exhausted. But they didn't stop. They started building, timber frames to hold the channel walls, stones mortared with mud to reinforce the bottom. Careful grading to ensure the water would flow downhill without erosion. It was slow, back-breaking work. Other ranchers saw them working. Some shook their heads, muttering about fools and wasted effort. A few stopped to watch, curiosity overcoming judgment. One man, an old-timer named Hennessy, who'd known Colt's father, even offered advice about channel construction. "You're making enemies doing this," Hennessy said. "I've already got enemies," Colt replied. "Might as well give them something to be mad about." Word spread through Red Hollow. Colt Mercer and his Chinese worker fighting Garrett Pierce over water rights. Some people thought it was principled. Most thought it was suicide. Mrs. Patterson came to the ranch one evening, her husband's wagon loaded with timber. "Don't ask questions," she said when Colt tried to thank her. "Just take it before I change my mind." The timber helped. The work continued. And slowly, painfully, exhaustingly slowly, the channel took shape. But Pierce wasn't idle. Mei Lin was in town for supplies when she heard the news. The territorial judge was coming to Red Hollow. Pierce had filed a formal claim, disputing the water rights. There would be a hearing in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to finish the channel? 2 weeks to prove their claim. 2 weeks before everything they'd fought for could be taken away by a man in a suit who'd never worked a day in this dirt. Mei Lin bought the supplies and rode back fast. When she told Colt, he went very still. 2 weeks, he said. "Can we finish in time?" "I don't know, maybe." He looked toward the hills, toward the half-built channel. "We'd have to work dawn to dusk, no breaks, no mistakes." "Then that's what we do." Colt turned to her. "Mei Lin, if we lose this hearing, I lose the ranch. Pierce wins. You'll have to leave." "Then we don't lose." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." She stepped closer. "We work. We finish. We show the judge that the water belongs here, that we've earned it. And we don't give Pierce the satisfaction of watching us quit." Colt looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Not just the worker or the outsider, but the woman who'd crossed an ocean and survived 2 years of cruelty and still had the spine to stand in front of him and say, "We don't give up." "Partners," he said quietly. "Partners," she agreed. And if there was something more than partnership growing between them, something neither of them was ready to name, they pushed it aside and focused on the work, because work was what they knew. Work was what they could control, and work, they hoped, would be enough to save them both. They worked like people possessed. Dawn to dusk turned into dawn past dusk, working by lantern light when the sun gave up on them. Mei Lin's hands stopped healing. Every night they bled. Every morning she wrapped them in fresh cloth and picked up the tools again. Colt's shoulder got worse, the old injury flaring until he couldn't lift his right arm above his head without his face going white. He switched to his left hand and kept working. The channel grew. Inch by painful inch, it took shape. Timber reinforcements sunk deep, stones mortared tight, the grade carefully maintained so water would flow fast enough to prevent silting but slow enough to avoid erosion. It was brutal, precise work that demanded everything they had. On the 5th day, Colt collapsed. Mei Lin found him by the channel, on his knees, his face gray. She dropped the rock she'd been carrying and ran to him. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was weak. "You're not fine. You're exhausted." She helped him sit, felt his forehead. He was burning up. "You have a fever." "Just tired." "Colt, you need to rest." "We don't have time for rest." He tried to stand, swayed, and Mei Lin caught him before he fell. "The hearing is in 9 days. We're not even halfway done." "And you'll be dead in 9 days if you don't stop." She pulled his arm over her shoulders, taking his weight. "You're going back to the ranch. Now." "Mei Lin, don't argue with me. Not about this." Something in her voice made him stop protesting. She got him to his horse, somehow got him mounted, and led him back down the hill. By the time they reached the ranch house, he was barely conscious. She got him inside onto the bed. His skin was fire hot, his breathing shallow. Fever. The same thing that had killed his wife and daughter. Mei Lin felt panic claw at her throat, but pushed it down. Panic was useless. Action was what mattered. She stripped off his shirt, trying not to look at the scars on his chest and back, old wounds, hard-earned. Got cold water from the well and soaked rags, pressing them to his forehead, his neck, his chest. He shivered despite the heat, mumbling words she couldn't understand. She stayed with him through the night, changing the rags, forcing water between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. The fever climbed. She remembered Sarah and Emma buried on the ridge and felt something fierce and desperate rise in her chest. You don't get to die, she told him, her voice rough. You hear me? You don't get to bring me here, make me care about this place, and then die. That's not fair. Colt's eyes opened, unfocused. Maylin? I'm here. The channel. Forget the channel. Can't forget it. Need to finish. His hand found hers, gripped weakly. Promise me. If I don't, promise you'll finish it. You're going to finish it yourself. Promise. Maylin wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, that he'd be fine. But she knew fever, knew how fast it could turn deadly. I promise, she said quietly. Colt's eyes closed. His grip loosened. For a terrible moment, she thought he'd stopped breathing. Then his chest rose and fell, and she let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The fever broke near dawn. One moment he was burning, the next he was drenched in sweat, shivering violently. Maylin piled blankets on him, kept the fire going, and finally allowed herself to believe he might survive. She dozed in the chair beside the bed, waking every time he stirred. When she opened her eyes fully, sunlight was streaming through the window and Colt was looking at her. You stayed, he said. His voice was hoarse but clear. Of course I stayed. The channel is still there. It can wait one more day. She stood, testing her own exhaustion. How do you feel? Like I got trampled by a horse. He tried to sit up, failed. How long was I out? About 12 hours. The fever broke at dawn. She brought him water, helped him drink. You scared me. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't do it again. She set the cup down. You pushed too hard. We both did. But you especially. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I keep thinking about Sarah, about how I couldn't save her, couldn't save Emma, and now this ranch, it's all I have left of them. If I lose it, he looked away. If I lose it, I lose them all over again. Maylin sat back down. Tell me about Emma. He glanced at her, surprised. Why? Because you never do. You mention her, but you don't talk about her. What was she like? Colt's throat worked. She was loud, always running, always asking questions, drove Sarah crazy sometimes, but in a good way. A faint smile touched his lips. She loved the horses. Used to sneak into the barn and try to feed them sugar cubes she'd steal from the kitchen. Sarah would find her sitting in Luna's stall, just talking to her like Luna understood every word. Maybe she did. Maybe. The smile faded. The day she got sick, she asked me to take her riding. I said later I was busy with the irrigation. There was always something more important than later. His voice cracked. There was no later. Maylin reached out, took his hand. You couldn't have known. Doesn't matter. I still chose wrong. Then don't choose wrong now. She squeezed his hand. Rest today. Get your strength back. Tomorrow we work. Together. And we finish what we started. Colt looked at their joined hands, then at her face. Something in his expression shifted, became raw. Why do you care so much? About this place? About me? You could leave, find work somewhere safer. I told you before, so tell me again. The real reason. Maylin thought about lying, about giving him the easy answer, but he'd been honest with her, had shown her his scars. He deserved the same. Because you're the first person in 2 years who looked at me and saw a person, she said. Not a foreigner, not a problem, not something to use or discard. A person. Someone worth listening to, worth trusting. She felt her throat tighten. And because when I'm here, working beside you, I feel like I matter. Like I'm building something instead of just surviving. Colt's grip on her hand tightened. You do matter, more than you know. They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, something unspoken passing between them. Then Maylin cleared her throat and stood. Rest, she said. I'm going to check the animals. Maylin, rest Colt. She left before he could say whatever he'd been about to say, because she wasn't ready to hear it. Wasn't ready to name the thing growing between them, warm and dangerous and entirely too complicated. Outside, the morning was clear and cold. She fed the horses, checked the fences, did all the small tasks that kept a ranch running, and tried not to think about how Colt's hand had felt in hers, or how terrified she'd been at the thought of losing him. Tried and failed. Colt rested for 1 day. On the second morning, despite Mei Lin's protests, he was up and insisting they return to the channel. His fever was gone, but he was still weak, moving carefully like his body might betray him. "You should stay here," Mei Lin said. "We have 7 days. I'm not wasting one of them." "You're still recovering, and I'll recover faster knowing we're making progress." He saddled his horse with slow, deliberate movements. "Besides, I made a promise to finish this. Same as you." Mei Lin wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Colt Mercer was the most stubborn man she'd ever met. Trying to stop him was like trying to stop a river with your hands. "Fine," she said. "But you work slow. If you start looking gray again, we stop. Agreed?" "Agreed." They rode up to the channel. Someone had been there, fresh horse tracks in the dirt, and 3 of their carefully placed timber supports had been torn out, thrown into the gully. Pierce's men making their position clear, Colt stared at the damage, his jaw tight. They're not even pretending anymore. How long to fix it? Half a day if we're lucky, longer if they damage the foundation. He dismounted carefully. "Let's get to work." They worked through the morning, replacing the timber, reinforcing what Pierce's men had tried to destroy. By noon, they'd repaired most of the damage. That's when they heard horses approaching. 3 riders. Pierce in the lead, flanked by 2 of his hired men, hard-looking types with guns on their hips and no conscience in their eyes. Pierce was smiling. "Colt," he called out, all false friendliness. "Still wasting time on this?" "It's my time to waste." "Not for much longer." Pierce dismounted, walking closer to examine their work. "I have to admit I'm impressed. You've actually made progress. Too bad it's all illegal. The judge hasn't ruled yet. He will. And when he does, all this—" Pierce gestured at the channel, at their weeks of work. "Will belong to me. Water rights, land access, everything." He looked at Mei Lin with that same predatory interest he'd shown before. "Though I might be willing to negotiate. Let's say you sign the ranch over now, avoid the hearing entirely. I'll even let you stay on as a hired hand, both of you." "Not interested." "Think about it, Colt. You're not going to win this. You know that. The judge is a reasonable man, but he understands property law. That spring feeds onto my land downstream. I have legitimate claim to it. Your little construction project here doesn't change that. Then why are your men sabotaging it?" Pierce's smile widened. "Sabotage? I don't know what you're talking about. If someone's been interfering with your work, well, that's unfortunate. But it has nothing to do with me. Like hell it doesn't. Careful with accusations, Colt. Slander is a serious charge." Pierce turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, one more thing. I've been hearing complaints from town. Seems some folks are uncomfortable with you harboring an unmarried Chinese woman out here. There's talk of bringing in the territorial marshal, making sure everything is proper." Mei Lin felt ice slide down her spine. She knew what that meant. They could accuse her of anything: prostitution, vagrancy, illegal immigration. The marshal wouldn't care about the truth. He'd just see a Chinese woman and a white rancher living together unmarried, and that would be enough. "You son of a—" Colt started forward, but Mei Lin grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "That's what he wants." Pierce laughed. "Smart woman. You should listen to her, Colt. She's got more sense than you do." He mounted his horse. 7 days until the hearing. After that, this all becomes academic. Think about my offer. It's the best you're going to get." They rode off, leaving Colt and Mei Lin standing in the dust. "He can't do that," Colt said, his voice shaking with fury. "He can't threaten you like that." "He just did." Mei Lin's mind was racing. "And he will follow through. Men like Pierce always do." "Then what do we do?" "We finish the channel. We prove at the hearing that the water belongs here. And we make it so obvious, so established, that even Pierce can't argue it away." She looked at him. "But we have to finish before the marshal comes. Because if he arrests me before the hearing, I won't let him arrest you. You might not have a choice." Colt was quiet, his face hard. Then he said, "There is one way to stop that threat." "What?" "If we were married, legally. Then you wouldn't be an unmarried Chinese woman living with a white rancher. You'd be my wife. Harder to make accusations stick." Mei Lin stared at him. "Are you—" It's a legal arrangement, that's all. Colt wouldn't quite meet her eyes. For protection. So Pierce can't use that angle against us. We'd go to the Reverend, sign the papers, and that's it. Nothing has to change. Everything would change, only on paper. Maylin's heart was pounding. Marriage. To Colt Mercer. A man she'd known for barely 6 weeks, a man she worked beside and argued with, and cared about, more than was smart. Think about it, Colt said. You don't have to decide now, but with the hearing in 7 days and Pierce making threats. Yes. Colt blinked. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. Maylin felt like she was jumping off a cliff, but the alternative was worse. For protection, for the ranch, for... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. For survival, Colt finished quietly. Yes, for survival. They looked at each other, and Maylin wondered if he felt it too. The weight of what they'd just agreed to, the way it shifted something fundamental between them. Partnership was one thing. Marriage, even a practical one, was something else entirely. We'll go tomorrow, Colt said. Get it done before Pierce hears about it and tries to interfere. All right. And then we come back here and finish this channel. Yes? Maylin, don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything else. Not now. Let's just work. So they worked. Driving timber, mortaring stones, building something that would outlast them both. And tried not to think about the fact that tomorrow they'd be married. And nothing, no matter what they told themselves, would ever be the same again. They rode into Red Hollow at dawn. The town was just waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers sweeping storefronts. Reverend Daniels lived behind the church in a small house that looked like it had been built from leftover lumber and good intentions. Colt knocked. The Reverend answered, already dressed despite the early hour, his face showing surprise when he saw them. Colt, what brings you here so early? We need you to marry us. Daniels looked from Colt to Maylin and back again. I see. When? Now. Now? The Reverend's eyebrows rose. That's unusual. Is there a particular reason for the hurry? Several. But the main one is that I'm asking you to do it, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't ask too many questions. Daniel studied them both for a long moment. Maylin forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away. Finally, the Reverend nodded. Come in then. I'll need witnesses. Let me fetch Mrs. Patterson. She lives next door, and she's always up early. While Daniels went to get the witness, Maylin and Colt stood awkwardly in the Reverend's small parlor. The walls were covered with faded scripture verses and a painting of a mountain that looked nothing like Wyoming. You can still change your mind, Colt said quietly. Can you? No, this is the right thing to do. Then I'm not changing my mind either. Daniels returned with Mrs. Patterson, who looked at them both with sharp, knowing eyes but said nothing. The ceremony was brief, perfunctory. Daniels read from his Bible, asked the necessary questions, had them repeat vows that felt strange in Maylin's mouth. To love and honor and cherish, in sickness and health, till death parted them. They were lies, she told herself. Practical lies for a practical purpose. But when Colt slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, he said quietly, something in her chest tightened. You may kiss your bride, Daniel said. Colt hesitated. Maylin could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Then he leaned in and kissed her, brief and chaste, his lips warm against hers. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. It felt like forever. Congratulations, Daniel said, closing his Bible. You're married. They signed the papers. Mrs. Patterson signed as witness, her expression unreadable. When it was done, Daniel shook Colt's hand and nodded to Maylin. I hope you'll both be very happy, he said, and something in his tone suggested he doubted it. They left quickly, Maylin's hand feeling strange with the unfamiliar weight of the ring. They were halfway out of town when they ran into Jake Thornton outside the saloon. Jake took one look at them, Colt's protective posture, Maylin's ringed finger, and his face went ugly. Well, hell, he said. You actually married her. That's right. Colt Mercer, married to a Chinese woman. Your daddy must be rolling in his grave. My daddy would have liked her a damn sight more than he ever liked you. Colt's voice was flat, dangerous. Now get out of our way. Jake didn't move. Mr. Pierce is going to hear about this. Good. Make sure you tell him we're legal and proper now. That should solve his concerns about impropriety. Won't solve his concerns about the water. Didn't expect it would. Colt moved his horse forward, forcing Jake to step aside. Come on, Mei-Lin, we've got work to do. They rode out of town, and Mei-Lin felt the weight of eyes watching them. Curious, hostile, shocked. She kept her head up, her back straight. She was Mei-Lin Mercer now, Mrs. Colt Mercer. That meant something, even if she wasn't sure what. You all right? Colt asked once they were clear of town. I don't know. Are you? Honestly, no idea. He glanced at her. That was probably the strangest thing I've ever done. Me too. But it's done, for better or worse. Those were part of the vows, weren't they? Yeah, they were. They rode in silence for a while. Then Mei-Lin said, Thank you for doing this. I know it's not what you wanted. Colt reined in his horse, turned to look at her. Mei-Lin, I married you because I wanted to, not just for the protection, not just to stop Pierce. I wanted to because... He stopped, seemed to search for words. Because working beside you these past weeks, I felt more alive than I have in 3 years. Because you make me believe this place can be saved. Because when I thought I might die from that fever, the thing that scared me most was never seeing you again. Mei-Lin's breath caught. Colt! I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this is a practical arrangement. I know you didn't come to Wyoming looking for a husband. But I wanted you to know this wasn't just about legal protection for me. It was about... He looked away. It was about wanting you to stay. Any way I could make that happen. Mei-Lin sat on her horse, the morning sun warm on her face, and felt something break open inside her. For 2 years she'd been running, surviving, building walls to keep the pain out. And now here was Colt Mercer, this stubborn rancher with his dying land and his dead family and his impossible hope, telling her she mattered, telling her he wanted her to stay. I want to stay, she said quietly. I want this to work. Not just the ranch, us. All of it. Colt looked at her, and the hope in his eyes was painful to see. Yeah? Yeah. He smiled then, real and warm, and Mei-Lin felt herself smile back. They were married. It was terrifying and strange and nothing like what either of them had planned, but it was done. They were in this together now. Come on, Colt said. We've got a channel to finish. And a hearing to win. That too. They rode toward the hills, toward the spring and the half-finished channel, and all the work still waiting. Behind them, Red Hollow buzzed with the news. Colt Mercer had married the Chinese woman. Some people were scandalized, some were disgusted. A few, like Mrs. Patterson, just nodded and thought it was about time. And in his fine house on the edge of town, Garrett Pierce heard the news and smiled. Because marriage or not, the hearing was in 6 days. And he had plans. They worked without stopping. 5 days of brutal labor, every muscle screaming, every blister reopening. But the channel grew, the timber held, the water flowed. On the evening of the 5th day, as the sun set over the valley, they hammered in the last support post. It was done. The channel ran clean and strong from the spring all the way down to the ranch, water pouring through it like it had always been there. Mei-Lin stood ankle-deep in the flow, watching it rush past, and felt something close to disbelief. They'd actually done it. It's beautiful, she said. Colt came to stand beside her, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. It's ugly as hell, but it works. That's what makes it beautiful. He laughed, the sound rough but genuine. I guess so. He looked at her. We did it, Mei-Lin. We actually did it. We did. She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. Together. Together, he agreed. They stood there in the water, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and red, and for just a moment allowed themselves to believe they might actually win, that all the work, all the pain, all the stubbornness might be enough. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow, Garrett Pierce would make his case, and the territorial judge would decide who had the right to this water, this land, this future. But tonight, they had this. They had water flowing where there'd been dust. They had calloused hands and tired muscles and the satisfaction of work well done. They had each other, strange and unexpected as that was. Tonight, that was enough. The hearing was set for 10 in the morning at the town hall, a drafty building that smelled of old wood and older grudges. Maylin woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves. Colt was already up, standing by the window and staring out at nothing. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Couldn't." He turned to face her. "Keep thinking about everything that could go wrong." "That won't help." "I know. Doesn't stop me from doing it." He crossed to the stove, started making coffee. "Pierce has money. He has fun influence. He probably has the judge in his pocket already." "Maybe. Or maybe the judge is honest." "You believe that?" Maylin thought about it. "I believe we have to act like he is. Otherwise, what's the point?" Colt handed her coffee, their fingers brushing. The touch still sent a small jolt through her, even after a week of being married. A week of sleeping in the same house, her on the cot she'd insisted on keeping, him in his bed, both of them pretending the arrangement was perfectly normal. "I'm scared," Colt admitted quietly. "I haven't let myself be scared this whole time, but now I know I am too. If we lose, we won't. But if we do, Maylin, I need you to know—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "I need you to know that having you here, working beside me, you've made this place feel alive again. Even if it all ends today, I won't regret it." Maylin set down her coffee cup and walked to him. She took his face in her hands, rough and calloused as they were, and made him look at her. "We are not losing today. We have the channel. We have proof. We have the truth. That has to count for something." "Does it? In a world where men like Pierce make the rules?" "Then we make them see that his rules don't apply to water that's been flowing to your land for generations, that some things belong to the earth, not to whoever has the most money." Colt covered her hands with his, held them against his face. "When did you get so fierce?" "I was always fierce. I just had nowhere to put it until now." They stood like that for a moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Colt straightened, squaring his shoulders. "All right, let's go show them what we're made of." They dressed carefully. Colt put on his good shirt, the one he'd been married in, and his cleanest pants. Maylin wore the dress Mrs. Patterson had given her. Simple blue cotton, nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. She braided her hair, pinned it up, looked at herself in the small mirror and tried to see what the judge would see. A Chinese woman, an outsider, someone who didn't belong. She lifted her chin and met her own eyes in the glass. Let them see that. Let them underestimate her. She'd been underestimated her whole life. She knew how to use it. They rode into Red Hollow together. The town was unusually busy for a weekday morning. Word of the hearing had spread, and people wanted to see the show. Maylin could feel their stares as they dismounted outside the town hall. Some were curious, some hostile. A few were sympathetic, though those people didn't meet her eyes. Inside, the hall was already packed. Pierce sat at the front with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never done a day of real work in his life. They were laughing about something, comfortable and confident. Colt and Maylin took seats on the opposite side. A few people nodded to Colt, Hennessy, Mrs. Patterson, a couple of other old-timers who remembered his father. Everyone else pointedly looked away. The territorial judge arrived at 10 sharp. Judge Warren Holloway was in his 60s, with white hair and a face carved from granite. He'd been a judge for 30 years, people said, and was known for being fair but unmovable. Once he made a decision, that was the end of it. "All rise," someone called, and everyone stood while Holloway took his seat at the front. "Sit down," Holloway said, his voice rough from decades of tobacco. "Let's get this over with. I have 3 other cases to hear today, and I'd like to finish before midnight." Pierce's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not. I'll hear from the plaintiff first." Holloway looked at Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, this is your claim. Make it brief." Pierce stood, projecting confidence like a second skin. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of water rights. The spring in question originates on disputed land I have a legitimate claim to through my downstream water usage and prior appropriation. For the past 3 years, Mr. Mercer has allowed that spring to lie dormant, unused. Now suddenly, he's constructed an elaborate channel system." "Not suddenly," Colt interrupted. "I've been planning this for months." Holloway held up a hand. "Mr. Mercer, you'll have your turn. Mr. Pierce, continue." As I was saying, Mr. Mercer has constructed this channel in an attempt to establish a claim he doesn't have. The water from that spring flows naturally onto my property. By territorial law, that gives me rights to it. His interference with the natural water flow is, frankly, theft. Theft is a strong word, Holloway said, but accurate, Your Honor. I've been using water from the creek that spring feeds into for years. Mr. Mercer's channel diverts that water before it reaches my land. That's theft, plain and simple. Pierce sat down, looking pleased with himself. His lawyer nodded approvingly. Holloway turned to Colt. Mr. Mercer, your response? Colt stood slowly. Malin could see his hands shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. Your Honor, that spring has fed my family's land for 40 years. My father used it, my grandfather before him. It's always run to our ranch, always watered our fields. 3 years ago, it got blocked by a rock slide. I couldn't clear it alone. I didn't have the help. But the claim to that water is mine by right of use going back decades. Can you prove that? Holloway asked. I have my father's journals. He documented the spring, the water flow, everything. I brought them. Colt held up a worn leather book. Pierce's lawyer stood. Your Honor, a man's private journal is hardly objective evidence. I'll decide what's evidence. Holloway cut him off. Sit down. He looked at Colt. What else do you have? The channel itself, it follows the old irrigation line my father built. We just reinforced it, made it permanent. The water wants to flow to my land. It always has. We just gave it a clear path. Wants to flow, Pierce scoffed. Your Honor, water doesn't want anything. It follows gravity and opportunity. Mr. Mercer built an artificial channel to steal water that should flow naturally onto my property. Holloway was quiet for a moment, studying both men. Then he said, I want to see this spring, both the channel and the natural water flow. We're going to take a ride. Pierce's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, that's highly irregular. So is claiming water rights based on what you think might happen naturally? Holloway stood. We leave in 10 minutes? Mr. Pierce, Mr. Mercer, you're both coming. Everyone else, dismissed. The crowd murmured, disappointed at being sent away from the spectacle. Malin started to stand, but Holloway pointed at her. You're Mrs. Mercer? Yes, sir. You worked on this channel? Yes, sir. Then you're coming too. I want to hear from the person who did the actual labor. Pierce's lawyer opened his mouth, but Holloway silenced him with a look. I said what I said. Let's go. They rode out in a strange procession. Holloway in front, Colt and Malin behind him. Pierce and his lawyer after that. A few townspeople tried to follow, but Holloway waved them off. This wasn't a show anymore. It was an investigation. The ride up to the spring took an hour. Malin led the way along the channel, pointing out their work. The timber reinforcements, the carefully graded slope, the places where they'd cleared decades of accumulated debris. Holloway dismounted several times, examining their construction, asking questions. Who designed this? He asked at one point. We both did, Colt said. I knew the land, Malin knew water. We figured it out together. Holloway looked at Malin. You know irrigation? I learned it in China, sir. Different land, but water behaves the same everywhere. And you found this spring? Yes, sir. It was blocked. We cleared it. Why? The question surprised her. Because the land was dying without it. Because it belonged here. Because... She stopped, searching for words. Because some things are worth fighting for. Holloway grunted, his expression unreadable. They continued up to the spring itself. When they reached the source, Malin showed him the rock slide they'd cleared, the opening they'd dug, the way the water now flowed freely into their channel. And before you cleared it, Holloway asked, where did the water go? Nowhere, Malin said. It was trapped, building up behind the rocks, seeping into the ground, wasted. Pierce spoke up. Or it was finding its way through underground channels to my creek. Show me, Holloway said. I beg your pardon? Show me these underground channels. Show me evidence that this water was reaching your property before Mr. Mercer cleared the spring. Pierce faltered. I don't have physical evidence, but then you have a theory, not a claim. Holloway turned back to the spring, studying it. Mrs. Mercer, if you blocked this channel you built, where would the water go? Malin walked around the area, examining the land. downhill, but not toward Mr. Pierce's property. The natural grade runs east, not south. It would probably form a marsh in that low area, she pointed, and eventually evaporate or sink into the ground. Not onto my land? Holloway pressed. No, sir, the watershed divides right here. Mr. Pierce's creek is fed by springs on the other side of that ridge. This spring has nothing to do with it. Pierce's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer is hardly a qualified surveyor. No, but she knows water. I've been watching her examine this land, and she knows what she's looking at. Holloway walked to the edge of the divide Mei Lin had indicated, studying the terrain. I agree with her assessment. This water wouldn't naturally reach your property, Mr. Pierce. But the law says prior use establishes rights. Mr. Mercer's father used this spring for decades. That's documented, and I'm inclined to believe it. Your claim is based on speculation about underground water flow, which you can't prove. Holloway turned to face them all. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Mercer. The spring and the water rights belong to him. Mei Lin felt her knees go weak. They'd won. They'd actually won. Pierce's face went dark red. This is outrageous. You can't. I can, and I did. This hearing is concluded. Holloway mounted his horse. Mr. Mercer, keep that channel maintained. It's good work, and the territory needs more people willing to work that hard. Mrs. Mercer, he nodded to Mei Lin, you're a credit to your husband. Then he was riding away, leaving them standing by the spring with Pierce and his lawyer. Pierce turned to Colt, his charm completely gone. You think this is over? You think one ruling changes anything? Changes everything, Colt said. The water is legally mine now. You can't touch it. I don't need to touch your water. I can still make your life hell. I can make sure no one in town will do business with you. You can do whatever you want, Mei Lin interrupted. It won't matter. We have water. We have land. We have each other. That's more than you have. Pierce looked at her like she was an insect he wanted to crush. You're going to regret this, both of you. Maybe, Colt said, but not today. Pierce and his lawyer rode off, defeated but not broken. Mei Lin knew this wasn't the end. Men like Pierce didn't give up just because they lost one battle. But right now, in this moment, they had won. Colt turned to her, his face breaking into a grin. We did it. We did. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, they were both breathless, grinning, dizzy with relief and victory. I can't believe it, Colt said. I thought for sure. Don't think about what could have happened. Think about what did. Mei Lin grabbed his hands. We won, Colt. The water is ours. The ranch can survive. No, not the ranch. He pulled her closer. We can survive, together. And then he was kissing her, not the brief perfunctory kiss from their wedding, but something real, deep, full of relief and joy, and something else. Something that had been building between them for weeks, but neither had been willing to name. When they broke apart, Mei Lin was breathing hard. Colt, I know this is supposed to be a practical arrangement, he said quickly. I know we agreed it was just for protection. But Mei Lin, He stopped, seemed to gather courage. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen. I don't know when it happened, but it did, and I can't pretend anymore that this is just convenience. Mei Lin's heart was hammering. You love me? Yeah, I do. He looked terrified admitting it. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, and if you don't feel the same way, I do. The words came out before she could stop them. I do feel the same way. I think I have since you found me in that storm and looked at me like I mattered. Colt's expression transformed. Really? Really. She laughed, feeling giddy and terrified and more alive than she'd felt in years. I love you, Colt Mercer. Which is probably insane, but I don't care. He kissed her again, and this time she kissed back fully, wrapping her arms around his neck, letting herself feel everything she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. We should get back, Colt said. Tell everyone the news. About the water or about us? Both. He took her hand. Come on, Mrs. Mercer. Let's go home. They rode back to town together, hand in hand, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. At the edge of Red Hollow, they found a small crowd waiting. Word had already spread about the judge's ruling. Hennessy was there, and Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of others who'd been quietly rooting for them. "You won?" Hennessy asked as they dismounted. "We won," Colt confirmed. Cheers went up from the small group. Hennessy clapped Colt on the back, nearly knocking him over. Mrs. Patterson smiled, actually smiled, and nodded to Mei Lin. "Knew you had it in you," she said. Not everyone was celebrating. Mei Lin could see clusters of people watching from storefronts, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. Jake Thornton stood outside the saloon, glaring. But for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Mei Lin didn't care. Let them stare. Let them judge. She had won something they couldn't take away. They stayed in town just long enough to file the paperwork making the ruling official, then headed back to the ranch. The ride home felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight they hadn't realized they were carrying had finally lifted. When they reached the ranch, Colt helped Mei Lin down from her horse and didn't let go. "We should celebrate." "How?" "I don't know. I haven't celebrated anything in 3 years. I'm out of practice." He thought for a moment. "There's a bottle of whiskey in the house. Sarah was saving it for a special occasion. I think this qualifies." They sat on the porch as the sun set, passing the bottle back and forth. It was good whiskey, smooth and warming. Mei Lin felt it loosen the tension she'd been carrying, felt herself relax for what seemed like the first time in months. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we plant. Get the fields ready. Use that water we fought so hard for." Colt took a drink. "Build this place back up. Make it something again. Think it'll work?" "I don't know. Maybe." He looked at her. "But I like our chances better with you here." "Where else would I go?" "Nowhere. I hope." He set down the bottle. "Mei Lin, I need to tell you something." "What?" "When I married you, I told myself it was practical, that I was doing it for the right reasons, protection, legality, all that. But the truth is, I think I wanted an excuse, a reason to make you stay that wasn't just me asking you to. You could have asked. Could I? You'd been here a month. You barely knew me. Why would you stay for someone you barely knew?" "Because you saw me," Mei Lin said quietly. "When everyone else looked at me and saw a problem or a foreigner or nothing at all, you saw a person. That's not something you forget." Colt reached for her hand, threaded his fingers through hers. "I was so alone before you came. I didn't even realize how alone until you were here, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. I was alone too. I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone." They sat in silence for a while, watching darkness settle over the valley. In the barn, Luna nickered softly. In the distance, a coyote called. The world continued, indifferent to their struggles and victories, but somehow that made this moment more precious, this small piece of peace they'd carved out against all odds. "Thank you," Colt said eventually. "For what?" "For staying that first night. For working beside me. For believing this place could be saved when I was starting to doubt it myself." He turned to face her fully. "For loving me when I didn't think I deserved to be loved anymore." Mei Lin felt tears prick her eyes. "You deserve it. You deserve all of it." "So do you." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that as the stars came out. Two people who'd been broken by the world but had somehow found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. The next morning, they woke early and started work. The channel was finished, the water secured, but there was still so much to do. Fields to prepare, seeds to plant, fences to mend. The ranch wouldn't save itself. It required daily attention, constant work, stubborn refusal to give up. But now they had something they hadn't had before. Hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind that was just fear wearing a mask. They worked through the morning, and Mei Lin found herself noticing small changes. The way Colt smiled more readily. The way he touched her hand as they passed each other, casual and comfortable. The way he talked about the future. Not if we survive, but when we thrive. Around noon, Hennessy rode up with his son, both of them carrying tools. "Heard you might need help with planting," Hennessy said gruffly. Colt looked surprised. "I can't pay, and didn't ask you to. Just figure it's time this valley remembered how to be neighborly." Hennessy dismounted. "Besides, your daddy helped me more times than I can count. Least I can do is return the favor." They weren't the only ones. Over the next few days, more people came. Old-timers who remembered Colt's father, Families who'd quietly disagreed with Pierce's tactics, even a few younger folk who were tired of watching one man run the whole valley. They brought tools, seeds, labor, advice. Not everyone came. Most of the town still treated Mei Lin with suspicion or outright hostility. But enough came that the ranch stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like what it was supposed to be, a working ranch, part of a community, alive. Pierce kept his distance, but Mei Lin knew he wasn't done. Men like him never were. But right now, with water flowing and seeds planted and people working beside them, she refused to let him occupy her thoughts. One evening, about a week after the hearing, Colt found her by the irrigation channel. She was watching water flow through the fields, seeing the first hints of green pushing through the soil. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, "thinking about my mother, about how she used to say water was life." Mei Lin smiled. She was right. She sounds wise. She was. Is. I hope she is. The uncertainty still hurt. I wish I could tell her about this place, about you, about how I finally found somewhere I belong. Colt put his arm around her shoulders. Maybe someday you can. Maybe we can bring them here, your family, if they're still... Maybe. Mei Lin leaned into him. For now, this is enough. You're enough. You know what I realized today? Colt said. I was in the barn mucking out stalls and I caught myself whistling. I haven't whistled in 3 years. Didn't even realize I'd stopped until I heard myself doing it again. What were you whistling? No idea. Some song my mother used to sing. He squeezed her shoulders. Point is, I'm happy. Really happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel that again. Me neither. Mei Lin turned to face him. When I left China, I thought I was running toward opportunity. Turned out I was just running, but now you're home. Now I'm home, she agreed. They kissed as the sun set behind them, the water flowing at their feet, the land coming back to life around them. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There would be hard winters, dry summers, setbacks, and struggles. Pierce would keep trying to undermine them. The town would take years to fully accept a Chinese woman as one of their own. But they had this. They had each other. They had land and water and stubborn hope. And for two people who'd lost everything, who'd been cast aside and written off, that was enough. More than enough. That night, Mei Lin moved her things from the cot to Colt's bed. Not because she had to, not for show, but because she wanted to. Because this marriage they'd entered into for practical reasons had become something real, something worth claiming fully. Colt watched her, his expression soft. You sure? I'm sure. She climbed into bed beside him, fitting herself against his side. This is where I belong. He held her close, his heart beating steady beneath her ear. I love you, Mei Lin Mercer. I love you too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who'd been alone for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to be held. Outside, the water they'd fought for flowed through channels they'd built together, feeding land that was coming back to life. And in Red Hollow, Garrett Pierce sat in his fine house and plotted his next move, because men like him never stopped. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Colt and Mei Lin had won. Tonight, they had each other. Tonight was enough. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory, but when it arrived, it transformed everything. The fields that had been brown and lifeless for 3 years turned green almost overnight. Water flowed steadily through the channels Mei Lin and Colt had built, feeding crops that pushed up through the soil with what seemed like determination. The ranch, which had felt like a graveyard for so long, began to feel alive again. But Pierce didn't disappear with winter. If anything, he became more present, a shadow at the edge of their success, waiting for his moment. It came on a bright morning in late April. Mei Lin was working in the vegetable garden behind the house when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders, moving fast. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and felt her stomach tighten when she recognized Pierce in the lead. Colt was in the barn. She called to him, her voice carrying across the yard. He emerged quickly, took one look at the approaching riders, and grabbed the rifle from where it leaned just inside the barn door. Pierce reined in his horse about 20 feet from the house, his 2 men flanking him. They all had guns, though none were drawn. Not yet. Colt, Pierce said, his voice carrying false pleasantness. Beautiful morning, isn't it? What do you want, Garrett? Just came to make you an offer. One last time. Pierce dismounted slowly, deliberately. I'll buy your ranch. Fair price. More than fair, actually. Enough for you and your wife to start over somewhere else. Somewhere you'd be more, welcome. We're not selling. You should reconsider. See, I've been doing some research. Turns out there are laws about Chinese immigration, exclusion laws, and I have it on good authority that Mrs. Mercer's papers might not be entirely in order. Maylin felt ice slide down her spine. Her papers were in order. She'd been careful about that. But the truth didn't matter if Pierce had enough influence to make officials look the other way. You're lying, Colt said, but his voice was tight. Maybe, maybe not. But even if I am, the accusation alone would be enough to cause problems. Immigration investigators, legal fees, months of uncertainty while her status is reviewed. Pierce smiled. Of course, all of that could be avoided if you just signed the ranch over to me. I'd even be willing to forget about the immigration concerns. That's extortion. That's business. Pierce's smile widened. You have until the end of the week to decide. After that, I make some calls to the territorial marshal. Your choice. He started to turn away, but Maylin stepped forward. No. Pierce looked at her, eyebrows raised. I beg your pardon? I said no. You don't get to threaten us into giving up everything we've built. Her voice was steady despite the fear churning in her gut. My papers are legal. I came through San Francisco, registered properly, have documentation. You can send your marshal, your investigators, whoever you want. They won't find anything wrong. Are you sure about that? Because I've seen how these things work. Sometimes papers get lost. Sometimes officials remember things differently than immigrants do. Pierce's voice turned cold. You're not from here, Mrs. Mercer. You don't understand how easy it would be to make you disappear. Colt raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at Pierce, but making his intention clear. Get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? Pierce gestured to his men. That would be murder, Colt. They'd hang you for it. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. Colt's voice was flat, emotionless. Now get the hell off my property before I decide it's worth it. For a moment, the morning hung suspended. Pierce calculating odds, Colt's finger on the trigger. Maylin trying to figure out how this had gone so wrong so fast. Then Pierce laughed, the sound ugly and false. You've got a week, he said, mounting his horse. Make the smart choice for once in your life. They rode off, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Colt lowered the rifle slowly, his hand shaking. He can't do that, he said. He can't just... He can try. Maylin's mind was already racing. We need to go to San Francisco, get copies of my immigration papers, bring them back here. Make it harder for him to lie. That's a week's travel each way, minimum. And we can't both go. Someone needs to stay here, watch the ranch. Then I'll go alone. Absolutely not. Colt, it's my legal status he's threatening. I should be the one... No. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes fierce. I'm not letting you travel alone, not with Pierce making threats. We'll figure something else out. What else is there? Before Colt could answer, they heard another horse approaching. This time it was just one rider, Mrs. Patterson, her face grim. I saw Pierce leaving, she said without preamble. Looked pleased with himself. What did he want? Colt explained. Mrs. Patterson's expression got darker with every word. When he finished, she sat silent for a moment, then said a word that would have made the Reverend faint. That son of a... She stopped herself, took a breath. My husband works for Pierce, has for years. And last night, he came home drunk and guilty and told me things. Things about Pierce's plans. What things? Maylin asked. Pierce has been buying up land all through the valley, pushing people out, forcing sales, using every dirty trick he knows. He wants to own everything from here to the territorial border, turn it all into one big cattle operation. Mrs. Patterson's hands tightened on her reins. Your ranch is the last piece he needs. Everything else he's already got or has deals pending. But you're in the middle of his planned grazing land and you won't sell, so he's going to take it. He can't just take it, Colt said. He can if he drives you out, and he will, one way or another. Mrs. Patterson looked at Maylin. The immigration threat is real. He's already paid off someone in the territorial office. They're prepared to claim your papers are fraudulent, arrest you, start deportation proceedings. Mei Lin felt the world tilt. How long do we have? Like he said, a week. Maybe less if he gets impatient. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. There might be one thing. My husband mentioned that Pierce keeps records. Evidence of all his deals, the money he's paid out, the officials he's bribed. He's too arrogant to think anyone would ever use it against him. Where does he keep these records? Colt asked. In his office, in a safe, but Mrs. Patterson shook her head. It doesn't matter. You can't get to them. The office is locked at night, and Pierce has armed men watching his property constantly. Then we don't go at night. Mei Lin's mind was working faster now, seeing possibilities. We go during the day, when his office is open. And do what? Ask him politely to hand over evidence of his crimes? No, we make him show us. Mei Lin turned to Colt. Pierce wants this ranch. What if we offered to sell it to him? What? Not really sell it, but make him think we're considering it. Get him to bring out his records, show us his other acquisitions, prove he can pay. While he's distracted, one of us finds the evidence Mrs. Patterson mentioned. Colt stared at her. That's insane and dangerous. If he figures out what we're doing, then we'd better not let him figure it out. Mei Lin looked between them. You have a better idea? No one did. The plan was desperate and probably stupid, but desperation had a way of making stupid plans look reasonable. I'll do it, Mrs. Patterson said. I can go through his office while you keep him busy. He's used to seeing me around. I help my husband with paperwork sometimes. He won't think twice. If you get caught, then I'll be in the same trouble you're already in. Mrs. Patterson's jaw was set. I'm tired of watching my husband come home drunk and guilty. Tired of watching good people get crushed by men like Garrett Pierce. If there's a chance to stop him, I'm taking it. They spent the rest of the day planning. It had to be convincing. Pierce was many things, but he wasn't stupid. They'd have to make him believe they were actually breaking, actually considering selling. That meant selling the desperation, the exhaustion, the fear, none of which was hard because Mei Lin felt all of it, but she pushed it down, focused on the plan. They'd go tomorrow. The longer they waited, the more time Pierce had to make good on his threats. That night, lying in bed beside Colt, Mei Lin couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning through everything that could go wrong. We don't have to do this, Colt said quietly. We could run, take what we can carry and just go. Where would we go? He'd find us. Men like Pierce always do. Then we fight him another way, legally. Get a lawyer. With what money? And even if we could, he's already bought the officials who'd hear the case. Mei Lin turned to face him. This is our only chance, Colt. We take it or we lose everything. I don't want to lose you. You won't. We're going to win this. She tried to sound more confident than she felt. We've come too far to let him win now. Colt pulled her close, and they lay like that in the darkness, holding each other like they could will the morning not to come. But morning came anyway, indifferent and bright. They dressed carefully, Mei Lin in her best dress, Colt in clean clothes that made him look more respectable than desperate. They had to look like people who'd been beaten down enough to consider surrender, but not so broken they'd lost all bargaining power. Mrs. Patterson met them at the edge of town. She looked nervous but determined. My husband thinks I'm visiting my sister. We have maybe 3 hours before he expects me back. They rode to Pierce's house together, a large building on the best land in Red Hollow, all new construction and expensive furnishings. A statement of power built on other people's losses. Pierce's men were visible around the property, but they didn't stop the visitors. Why would they? Colt Mercer coming to negotiate was exactly what Pierce wanted. Pierce himself answered the door, and his smile was immediate and genuine. Colt, Mrs. Mercer. What a pleasant surprise. His eyes flicked to Mrs. Patterson. And Mrs. Patterson, what brings you all here? We want to talk, Colt said, about your offer. Pierce's smile widened. Of course, come in, come in. He led them to his office, a room that reeked of money and success. Leather chairs, a massive desk, paintings on the walls that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Pierce gestured for them to sit. So, he said, settling into his chair, you've reconsidered my offer? We're thinking about it, Colt said, and Mei Lin heard the effort it took for him to keep his voice steady. but we need to know you can actually pay what you're promising. Need to see proof. You doubt my word? I doubt everyone's word when it comes to money. Pierce laughed, delighted. Smart. I like that. He stood, walked to a painting on the wall, some pastoral scene that probably meant nothing to him, and swung it aside to reveal a safe. I keep records of all my transactions, every deed, every payment, every acquisition, proof that I'm a man who pays what he promises. He spun the combination, opened the safe. Maylin's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was it. This was what they needed. Pierce pulled out a ledger, set it on the desk. Here, every piece of land I've purchased in the past 5 years. Names, dates, amounts paid. He flipped through pages, pointing out entries. The Morrison place, bought last year. The Chen property, acquired 2 years ago. The Patterson acreage. He glanced at Mrs. Patterson. Your husband made a good deal on that. Mrs. Patterson's face went pale, but she nodded. While Pierce was focused on the ledger, walking Colt through his empire of acquisitions, Mei Lin caught Mrs. Patterson's eye and gave a tiny nod. Mrs. Patterson stood slowly. Excuse me, she said. Is there a washroom I could use? Down the hall, second door on the left, Pierce said without looking up. Mrs. Patterson left. Pierce kept talking, showing Colt maps, documents, proof of his expanding territory. Mei Lin tried to focus, tried to keep her expression interested while her mind tracked time. How long would Mrs. Patterson need? What if someone stopped her? What if Pierce figured out what they were doing? Minutes dragged by like hours. Pierce was still talking, his voice full of pride and barely concealed greed. With your ranch, I'll control the entire valley. Water rights, grazing land, everything. I'll be the largest landowner in the territory. Congratulations, Colt said flatly. Don't sound so bitter. I'm offering you a way out with dignity and tact. You sell to me, take the money, start over somewhere else. Your wife won't face any immigration troubles. Everyone wins. Except everyone you've pushed out to get here. Pierce's smile dimmed slightly. That's business. You can't make progress without breaking a few eggs. Those eggs were people's lives. And now they have money to start new lives. Pierce leaned back. Look, Colt, I understand you're attached to that land. I get it. But sentiment doesn't keep a ranch running. Money does. And I have money. Mrs. Patterson returned then, her face composed but her hand shaking slightly. Mei Lin caught her eye, a quick glance, a tiny nod. She had it. Whatever evidence she'd been looking for, she'd found it. So, Pierce said, looking between Colt and Mei Lin, do we have a deal? Colt stood slowly. No. Pierce's expression flickered. I'm sorry? I said no. We're not selling. Colt's voice was steady now, all the false consideration gone. Not now, not ever. Then you've made a serious mistake. Pierce stood as well, his charm evaporating. I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. The easy way involved threatening my wife with deportation and lying about her papers. Colt stepped closer to the desk. But here's the thing, Garrett. Mrs. Patterson here just found something very interesting in your files. Documents showing every official you've bribed, every illegal deal you've made, every law you've broken to build your little empire. Pierce's face went white, then red. She wouldn't dare. She already did. Mrs. Patterson held up a sheaf of papers. Records of payments to the territorial surveyor to falsify property lines, bribes to the land office to push through acquisitions, even a letter to the immigration office with instructions on how to fabricate evidence against Mrs. Mercer. You can't prove any of that. These are your records, your handwriting, your signature. Mrs. Patterson's voice was steel. We can prove all of it. Pierce looked at his men, visible through the office window. For a moment, Mei Lin thought he might call them, might try to take the documents by force. But then his shoulders sagged slightly. He was beaten, and he knew it. What do you want? He asked finally. We want you to leave us alone, Colt said. Drop any threats against Mei Lin. Stop trying to force us to sell. And most importantly, he gestured at the papers Mrs. Patterson held, we want you to make things right with everyone you've cheated. That's impossible. Then we take these documents to the territorial governor. Let him decide what to do with you. Mei Lin stepped forward, Your choice. Make restitution to the people you've wronged or face criminal charges. Pierce stared at them, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. You realize you're making an enemy for life. We already had one, Colt said. At least now you can't do anything about it. The silence stretched out, thick and dangerous. Then Pierce laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fine. You win. This time. He looked at Mei Lin with cold eyes. But don't think this is over. I have a long memory. So do I, Mei Lin said quietly. And I remember every person who looked at me like I was nothing. Every time someone made me feel like I didn't deserve to exist. You're just one more on that list, and I survived all the others. They left with the documents, walking out of Pierce's house into bright morning sunshine. None of them spoke until they were well away from the property. Then Mrs. Patterson let out a long, shaky breath. I can't believe that worked. Neither can I, Colt admitted. He looked at Mei Lin. That was insane. And brilliant. And insane. It needed to be done. Mei Lin felt like her legs might give out, but she kept walking. What happens now? Now we take these documents to someone who can use them. Mrs. Patterson was already thinking ahead. The territorial governor's office, maybe even the federal marshal. Pierce has made enemies. Plenty of people would love to see him brought down. It took 3 weeks to untangle everything. The territorial governor sent investigators. Pierce's records were examined, verified, used to build a case. Some of the bribes were too old to prosecute, but there were enough recent crimes to matter. Pierce was arrested, charged with fraud, bribery, and illegal land acquisition. He posted bail immediately. He had that kind of money, but his empire was crumbling. People he'd cheated came forward with their own stories. Officials he'd bribed turned on him to save themselves. The man who'd seemed untouchable a month ago was suddenly fighting for his freedom. Mei Lin watched it unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Justice felt good, but she knew Pierce would never forgive them. Even if he went to prison, even if he lost everything, he'd remember. And someday, somehow, he might try to take revenge. But that was tomorrow's worry. Today, she had a ranch to run. The summer crops came in strong, better than Colt had seen in years. The water from the spring fed fields that produced wheat and corn and vegetables in abundance. They sold the surplus in town, made enough money to buy 2 more horses and repair the barn properly. The ranch was thriving in a way it hadn't since before Sarah and Emma died. Other changes came too. Slowly, gradually, Red Hollow began to shift. Not everyone. There were still people who crossed the street when they saw Mei Lin coming, who muttered about foreigners and propriety and the way things used to be. But enough people changed that it mattered. Hennessy and his family became regular visitors. Mrs. Patterson, freed from her husband's association with Pierce, became an unlikely friend. Even Reverend Daniels stopped by occasionally, always looking slightly uncomfortable but making the effort anyway. One afternoon in late July, Mei Lin was working in the garden when she saw a wagon approaching. She didn't recognize it at first, a covered wagon, travel-worn, pulled by 2 tired horses. Then it got closer, and she saw the faces of the people inside, and her knees went weak. "Colt!" Her voice came out as a scream. "Colt! Come here!" He ran from the barn, saw her face, followed her gaze to the wagon. "Who is it?" Mei Lin couldn't speak, could barely breathe, because climbing down from that wagon, older and thinner than she remembered but unmistakably real, were her mother and her youngest brother. She ran to them, stumbling over her own feet, and threw her arms around her mother so hard they both nearly fell. Her mother was crying, saying her name over and over in Chinese, holding her like she'd never let go. "How?" Mei Lin managed finally, pulling back to look at her mother's face. "How are you here?" "Your letters," her mother said in Chinese, her voice rough. "The money you sent. We saved it, used it to come. Your brother and I. Your father—" Her face fell. "Your father died last year, but he made us promise to find you, to see if you'd made a life." Mei Lin felt grief lance through her, sharp and sudden. Her father was dead. She'd never see him again, never hear his voice. But her mother was here, her brother was here. She hadn't lost everyone. "You made a life," her mother said, looking around at the ranch, at the green fields, at Colt, standing a respectful distance away. You survived. You found a home. I did. Madeline wiped her eyes, switched to English. Mama, this is Colt. My husband. Colt. This is my mother, Lin Wei, and my brother, Zhao Jian. Colt stepped forward, bowed slightly in what Mei Lin recognized as an attempt at Chinese courtesy. Welcome, he said slowly. Your daughter saved this ranch, saved me too. I'm honored to meet you. Mei Lin translated. Her mother studied Colt with sharp eyes, the way mothers do when evaluating the person their child has chosen. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded and said something in Chinese. She says you have kind eyes, Mei Lin translated, and that I chose well. Over the next weeks, Mei Lin's mother and brother settled into the ranch. There wasn't much room. They set up the wagon as temporary quarters while Colt and Hennessy worked on building an addition to the house. Mei Lin's brother, despite being only 16, was strong and willing to work. He learned ranch tasks quickly, asking questions in broken English and listening carefully to the answers. Her mother was quieter, watching everything with the same sharp attention she'd always had. She cooked food that made Mei Lin cry with nostalgia, the tastes of home, of childhood, of a life she'd thought was lost forever. And she worked in the garden with a knowledge of plants and growing things that impressed even Colt. Your mother is formidable, Colt said one evening, watching Lin Wei direct her son in the proper way to stake tomato plants. She always has been. Mei Lin leaned against him, comfortable and easy. When the soldiers came, she's the one who saved us, made decisions, kept us alive. My father was a good man, but my mother was the strong one. I can see where you get it from. Get what? That steel spine, that refusal to quit. Colt kissed the top of her head. You're your mother's daughter. Mei Lin smiled. Is that a good thing? It's the best thing. By harvest time, the ranch was unrecognizable from the dying place it had been a year ago. The fields were full, the water flowed strong, the barn was repaired and expanded. They had 4 horses now, 2 cows, chickens, and plans to buy sheep in the spring. The house had its addition, a small room where Mei Lin's mother and brother slept, giving everyone space but keeping them close. And the town, Red Hollow, had changed too. Pierce's trial was set for winter, and in his absence, a different attitude had taken hold. People started helping each other more, competing less. The Chinese workers from the railroad were treated with slightly more respect. It wasn't perfect, would probably never be perfect, but it was better. One crisp October morning, Mei Lin walked up to the ridge behind the ranch where Colt had buried Sarah and Emma. She'd never been up here before. It had felt like intruding on private grief. But today felt different. Today felt like something needed to be said. The graves were simple, marked with wooden crosses. Someone, Colt she assumed, had planted wildflowers that were now gone to seed. Mei Lin stood there for a long moment, trying to figure out what to say to 2 people she'd never met, but who shaped so much of the man she loved. I don't know if you can hear me, she said finally, but if you can, thank you. For loving him, for teaching him kindness, for making him into someone who could look at a stranger in a storm and see a person worth saving. The wind rustled through the dry grass. A hawk called somewhere overhead. I'll take care of him, Mei Lin continued, and the ranch, and the life you started here. I promise. She stood there a while longer, then turned to go. Colt was waiting at the bottom of the ridge, his expression understanding. You didn't have to do that, he said. I wanted to. They're part of your story, part of what made you who you are. She took his hand. And I love who you are. I love you too. He squeezed her hand. Come on. Your mother's making dumplings and she threatened me with a wooden spoon when I suggested she didn't need to make quite so many. Mei Lin laughed. My mother threatened you? Your mother terrifies me. Good, she's supposed to. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, Mei Lin's mother and brother were arguing good-naturedly about something in rapid Chinese. The water flowed through its channels, feeding the land, giving life where there'd been death. Winter came, as it always did. The trial happened. Pierce was found guilty on multiple charges, sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison, and ordered to pay restitution to everyone he'd cheated. His land empire was broken up, redistributed. Some people got their property back. Others, like Colt and Mei Lin, finally felt secure in what they had. The ranch made it through winter better than it had in years. They had enough food stored, enough hay for the animals, enough wood for the fire. And they had each other, Colt and Mei Lin, her mother and brother, and occasionally Hennessy or Mrs. Patterson stopping by to visit. On the last day of winter, with the first hints of spring showing in the early thaw, Mei Lin stood by the irrigation channel and thought about everything that had brought her here. The ocean crossing, the years of hard labor in San Francisco, the night in the storm when she'd been ready to give up, Colt finding her, the work, the struggle, the fear and hope and desperate determination. She'd come to America with nothing, had been treated like nothing, had survived by being invisible, by making herself small. But she wasn't small anymore. She was Mei Lin Mercer, co-owner of a thriving ranch, wife to a good man, daughter to a strong mother, sister to a brother learning to build his own life. She was someone who'd fought for every inch of what she had and won. The water flowed at her feet, cold and clear and constant. She'd freed this water from stone, had built channels to carry it where it needed to go, had refused to let it die unused. She'd done the same for herself. Colt found her there, as she somehow knew he would. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. "What are you thinking about?" he asked finally. "Everything. Nothing." She leaned against him. "How different my life is now, how different I am." "You were always strong. You just needed a place to be strong in." "Maybe." But Mei Lin looked out at the land, their land, earned through work and will and refusing to quit. Or maybe I needed someone who saw me as strong instead of weak, who gave me a reason to fight instead of just survive. We gave each other that. Yes, we did. Spring arrived fully in the weeks that followed, bringing new growth and new possibilities. They planted more fields, expanded the garden, made plans for the future. Mei Lin's brother talked about maybe building his own cabin on the far edge of the property when he was older. Her mother started teaching English to some of the Chinese workers in town, giving them tools to navigate this new country. And Mei Lin and Colt worked side by side, as they always had, building something that would last beyond them both. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Colt said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About starting a school, here, on the ranch. Nothing fancy, just basic reading and writing, for the workers' kids. For anyone who wants to learn." He looked at her. "Your mother could teach. She's smart, patient, knows both languages. And you could help. You're good at explaining things, making complicated ideas simple." Mei Lin turned the idea over in her mind. A school. A place where children, Chinese children, white children, whoever wanted to learn, could come together, where language wasn't a barrier, but a bridge. "Yes," she said. "Let's do it." They started small, just a few children at first, meeting in the expanded barn on Sunday afternoons. Mei Lin's mother taught Chinese characters and language. Mei Lin taught English and arithmetic. Colt, surprisingly, turned out to be good at teaching history and reading. Word spread. More families started bringing their children. Some of the adults came too, wanting to learn, wanting to better themselves. The Sunday school became a fixture in the valley, something people counted on. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Pierce got out of prison and left the territory entirely, his power broken. New people moved in, some friendly, some not, but the worst of the hostility faded. Mei Lin would never be fully accepted by everyone. Her face would always mark her as foreign, but she was respected. That was enough. She and Colt talked sometimes about having children of their own. Maybe someday. For now, they had the ranch, the school, each other. They had built something from nothing, turned dust into life, proved that two people who'd lost everything could find everything in each other. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting, they'd sit together on the porch and watch water flow through channels they'd built with bleeding hands and stubborn hearts. Water that fed fields and dreams and futures. Mei Lin Mercer had crossed an ocean to find a home, had survived hatred and hardship and nearly giving up. And in the end, she'd found more than shelter or safety. She'd found herself, found love, found a place where she didn't just survive but lived fully, fiercely, without apology. The water flowed, the land thrived, and Mei Lin Zhao, immigrant, outsider, survivor, had become exactly what she'd always been meant to be, Someone who mattered. Someone who belonged. Someone who'd looked at an impossible situation and decided impossible was just another word for not yet. She'd done it. They'd done it, together. And that, in the end, was everything.